This episode is proudly sponsored by HASA, the trusted choice for liquid chlorine. It's better because it offers the highest purity, works instantly, and contains no added CYA. By the bottom feeder, professional-grade battery-powered swimming pool vacuum system, it sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off the bottom feeder with code DVB100. Skimmer, trusted by over 30,000 pool service professionals across North America. Skimmer software helps you save time, grow revenue, and boost your 5-star reviews. Whether you're just starting out or expanding your team, Skimmer's easy-to-use tools and expert support have you covered. Upgrade your business in 2025 with Skimmer. Try Skimmer for 30 days for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, and welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about specifically when a saltwater generator is not holding chlorine or when you have zero chlorine with a saltwater generator. I'll go over some reasons why the chlorine may be zeroing out or why it's not producing chlorine to a sufficient level in the pool. Join my coaching program and take your pool service to the next level. Connect with other pool pros in your area, gain valuable knowledge, and transform your business with personalized one-on-one advice from me. With over 36 years of experience, I'm here to help you succeed like never before. Learn more at poolguycoaching.com. I have a lot of experience working with saltwater generators over the years. In the beginning, when they first started coming out, they were pretty rudimentary. They weren't that great. They've, of course, improved quite a bit. They're a lot more advanced. There's a lot of better systems out there, I should say, than initially back when they started coming into the market here in California. But they all have problems at some point, or you may have a problem with one of these on your route at some point where you run into a saltwater system that's not producing enough chlorine. The pool is zeroing out. It's not holding chlorine. Now, there are some obvious things to look for in these systems. Fortunately, with these advanced systems, a lot of them will let you know when the salt level is low in the pool. When the salt level is low, that's going to impede the system from producing chlorine. There are a few systems that will actually work somewhat with low salt readings. I believe the Hayward Aquarite will still produce some chlorine at some level with a low salt reading, but not much. I'm not sure if the Pentair systems will produce much chlorine with a low salt reading, but the salt is a necessary ingredient. If you listen to the podcast where I talk about how this actually works, the salinity level or the salt level is crucial because that's kind of how it makes the chlorine with the salt. So if there's not enough salt in the pool, it can't generate the chlorine. So that's the first thing you want to check. Unfortunately, there are a few systems that don't have a salinity reading built in. Now, if you have a Pentair IntelliChlor connected to an automated panel, you can get the reading from that. But in a lot of cases, you're going to have to get a digital salinity meter. If you have a Jandy TrueClear, for example, it doesn't have a salinity meter built into the system. So you'll need to get a digital one. You can buy a low-cost one on Amazon if you wanted to, somewhere in I think they're as low as like $40. But I prefer the name brand meters just because I feel like they're better, they're more accurate, and they last longer. So you can get a Hawk HACH one. That's a really good brand. Lamont makes a really great salinity tester. That's the one I'm currently using. You also have a few other ones out there that you can purchase as well. But look for one to have with you so you can check the salt reading of the pool. So that's number one. Is it not producing chlorine because the salt level is low in the pool? And that's the first thing I would check. On the flip side to that, if there's too much salt in the pool, it won't work as well. So make sure there's not too much salt in the pool. Usually the systems won't work if the salt level is over 4,000 or 4,500 parts per million, which is, by the way, not good for your equipment as well. This will wear out, the thermistors and heaters. They'll wear out check valves. They'll rust them. So a salt level of 4,500 or 5,000 or anything over 4,000 really is not good for the pool itself. So that's the first thing that I look for is the salt level, number one, too high or too low. then that will cause the system not to work. The next thing I would look for is the cell dirty? The cell plates are dirty. Now this could be something where you have to take the cell off to inspect it. Sometimes the system will tell you, it'll be flashing on the Pentair system or Hayward system if the cell is dirty, has too much calcium buildup on the plates, and this also will stop it from producing chlorine in the pool. Sometimes it can produce some of it, but in most cases it's going to stop all production and the pool will zero out. The Jandy True Clear, you can look on top and see the calcium buildup on the plates, and therefore you're going to know to clean the salt cell. Depending on the manufacturer is how much water to acid ratio you're going to use to clean it, but definitely if there's calcium buildup on the cell plates, the system is not going to produce chlorine. And some will indicate it, like the Hayward and Pentair systems, with a flashing light letting you know that the salt cell is dirty and it's not going to be producing chlorine. So that's number 2. I check for the salt level, then I check to see if the cell is dirty. And then the third thing I will do after those 2 are completed, I'll look to make sure that there's nothing wrong with the system itself. Now some systems will have an error code, other systems may not show an error code when there's something malfunctioning, but one thing that most of the systems will tell you is if there's flow to the pool. So here's the component that's really important, and these salt systems have a flow sensor because they're producing a lot of heat, and if there's not enough water flowing through the little chlorine factory, which is a salt cell, they could actually explode. And I've seen pictures of this. Nothing personally has happened on my route, but I've seen pictures from other pool guys of like the salt cell just exploding, and it's like the area is obliterated like a bomb. So they get really hot, and so they need flow. They need water flowing through it to work. So a lot of these will turn themselves off when there's not enough flow going there, which means that it's not going to be running without water in the cell, and it's not going to get hot, overheat, and explode. So the flow sensor may be damaged. Hayward, you're going to find a lot of the times the Hayward flow sensor is on a little thin cable, and rodents like to chew it. They get destroyed by gardeners with their weed whackers, and they're really fragile. And there's also a little arrow on there, so the arrow has to be pointed towards the return line. Yes, there's a minuscule little arrow on that flow sensor. Make sure it's pointing toward the return line. Others have flow sensors built in to the front of the cell, like the Pentair systems, and they had a run of bad flow sensors a few years back. So the flow sensor is key for the system to work. You'll have a no flow, meaning there's not enough water going through the salt cell, and it's not reading enough flow, and so it turns off and it's not producing chlorine. This also happens when your variable speed pump is running below 1800 RPMs. Most salt systems need at least 1800 RPMs for it to activate or for it to produce chlorine or have enough flow. So if you're running your VS pump at 1400 RPMs, more than likely that flow sensor is going to remain like a red light on your system, or it's going to say no flow. Even though the pool is running, it's not running at a high enough speed or RPM to have enough flow for that flow sensor to open up and allow the chlorine production at that point. So that's the third thing I look for, is the flow. It may be one of the first things you look for, because if you get to the stop and it's been running for a while and you see no flow, that's an indicator that there's a problem with the flow sensor. Or if it's running at full speed and the flow sensor is showing you that it's not working, or not actually having flow, I should say, then basically check that flow sensor to make sure it's functioning. And a lot of times you're going to find that the flow sensor has failed, saying that there's no flow when there's actually water flowing through the system. So once you've checked all of that, the salt level, you check that the cell is clean, and you check that there's no actual problems with the power center or with the flow sensor itself, and you're getting green lights, but it's still not producing chlorine, then there is some secondary things to look at that are not related to the actual system itself, but related possibly to the runtime of the pump. So make sure the pool is running long enough so it can produce chlorine. This is something that could be a secondary problem. The pump is just not running long enough for the saltwater generator to produce enough chlorine for the size of the pool. Depending on how many gallons of water is in the pool will be a good indicator of how long to run the pool pump. If you're not running the pool pump long enough, then it's of course going to be a problem, because then you're not going to produce chlorine because there's not enough time for that cell to really work and make that chlorine. For example, if you had a 30,000 gallon pool and you have a variable speed pump, and let's just say you ran it at 1800 RPMs for 6 hours and at 2600 RPMs for 3 hours. That's probably not going to be enough runtime, even with the chlorine, even with the system set at 100% output, to produce enough chlorine for that pool at that time. The numbers that the manufacturers base the amount of pounds that the saltwater generator will make for a pool is based on a 24-hour period running at the full 3450 RPMs, which is a pool pump running at full speed, like a single speed pump. So realistically, a VS pump running for maybe 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day on a lower speed or a low and a medium speed will not produce enough flow in that pool to get that salt cell to produce enough chlorine. It'll be making chlorine, yes, but it'll be making it in such a small amount that it's not going to raise the chlorine level up to the point it needs to be. Then the sun's UV rays will burn off that chlorine, regardless of the cyanuric acid level, because you're just not injecting enough chlorine to the pool to counter all the other things that go on in a pool, and therefore you're not producing enough chlorine because the pool is not running long enough. So that is a secondary factor beyond the equipment working. The pool runtime is a critical aspect of the saltwater system producing chlorine. A secondary aspect with the pool flow and the runtime is the pool's filtration system. Now, if you have a pool filter that has a problem, this is kind of weird, but it's something that makes some sense. So the pool filter, I'll give you this example so you kind of know where I'm going. Let's say you wake up in the morning and you want to make yourself a cup of coffee. So you get your coffee filter out and you notice there's a hole in the coffee filter, but you're like, it's not a big deal. The hole's not going to be a problem. So you put the coffee grains in there, you put the filter in the coffee maker. You can tell I don't make coffee, I'm a tea drinker. So you put the filter in the coffee maker, then you put the coffee beans inside the filter. There's a hole in there, so when you make your coffee, all of the grains from the coffee will go into the cup, and it's definitely going to be a problem drinking that coffee with all the coffee grains inside the coffee cup. So just imagine a pool filter, a DE filter with maybe a torn grid. Basically, everything's going to go right through. Because water will flow to the point of least resistance, everything will flow out through that hole in the grid and not really be filtered correctly. So a lot of the water is going to go through the hole in the filter and go back to the pool unfiltered, just like the coffee with the hole in the coffee filter. Same thing happens there. Same with the cartridge filter that has a failure. Maybe the top manifold is not on correctly, or it's cracked, or there's a tear in the cartridge filter, or the cartridge filters are really old and they're not filtering out the water correctly. This means that the water returning to the pool is not really filtered water. It's just circulating water, almost like if you're recirculating the pool water with a multi-port on recirculation mode where you bypass the filter. Same concept here. So even if the salt system is working properly and producing chlorine, since the pool filter is compromised, all the water going through there is not being filtered, which means that the water is not being sanitized correctly either, and this will lead to the pool having zero chlorine. So the pump running at a certain speed and time is a factor, but also a clean filter and a filter that's not compromised is a secondary factor in the circulation of the water that could allow for the pool to zero out even with the salt cell working properly. Besides the proper runtime, you also want to make sure that you have the output set at the proper level. So typically you would want to start at 100% output and go down from there if you're having trouble with the pool holding chlorine. The way the salt system works, if you have it set at 50% output, that means that for 30 minutes the salt cell is going to run, and for 30 minutes the salt cell will be off. And so it's not going to produce chlorine for 30 minutes during that period. Regardless of the speed of the pump, it's going to stop production because you have the output set lower. So one problem you may run into is that you will come upon a salt system where the output is set too low, maybe 20%, and simply boosting up the output to 100% will solve the problem of the pool having no chlorine, and you can leave the runtime the same as it was prior to that. You're just boosting up the output of the salt system, if that makes sense. And I'll stop here, and then in part 2 I'm going to cover how to do a 24-hour test to ensure that the salt cell is working or not. With all these factors already discussed here, you would want to make sure that, of course, when you do the 24-hour test, you have already eliminated the runtime, the cell output, and the percentage of the cell output, at 100% it should be set at, and then also the filtration system. And then you can do the 24-hour test, which I'll go over in the next podcast here in this series to give you an idea of how to test the cell, what I think is the most effective way to test the cell with this particular test. And if you're looking for this next podcast, of course, you can subscribe to my podcast show, or you can go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com, and go to the banner, the podcast icon on the banner, I should say, and there'll be a drop-down menu of 1,600 podcasts for you there. And then you can, of course, listen to those at your leisure. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com or on my website as well. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.